The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. I am Melissa Chavez, and I am filling in for Phil Liu as the host of today's PNSQC Summer Webinar Series. Today's topic is Quality and Agile. The sprint is too short. And our guest speaker today is Katy Sherman. Today, if you are live tweeting this and want to talk about what you're hearing today, you can use the hashtag PNSQC17, and our Twitter account is @PNSQC. Just to get us started today, PNSQC is the oldest software quality conference in North America, now in its 35th year. We're held every year in Portland, Oregon at the World Trade Center. We're a nonprofit organization run entirely by volunteers, and we focus on quality in software and maintenance and being a better tester. Conference speakers and participants are people who describe their own experiences and talk about how they make things better, how they get things to work better for them. Range of topics and speakers is everything from automation and distributed teams to Agile, DevOps, and security. Let's see. Participants, other than the speakers, are going to be muted. Questions are available. You can type them in under the questions panel. If you look on your panel below audio and webcam is a questions field, and you can ask that in there. I will be checking it throughout the webinar, and I will interrupt Katy to ask them so that she can finish up with her slides and everything. And she will be jumping in to answer questions either as they come along, or say that she'll be talking about them in an upcoming slide, or address them at the end. Let's see. Questions, can be asked throughout the webinar. And if you want, we have a specialized hashtag just for this presentation, hashtag sprint too short. All right, next slide. I am not Phil, but he could not make it today. He is off traveling, but he will be joining us for the conference if you have a chance to attend in person. It is October 9th through 11th, and we're going to skip this and get on to Katy. Katy is going to be our keynote speaker on Tuesday, October 10th. She is the Director of Software Engineering at Premier Health Alliance. She's an Agile enthusiast, author, and speaker. She has 20 years in technology as a developer and later as a development manager, and that is her Twitter account, Katy, Katy_Sherman. If you want to tweet at her or mention her in any of the things that you will be live tweeting, if you choose to do so. And you can find her on LinkedIn as well. She's passionate about agility, not just agile, but doing agile, quality and not just testing, diversity and inclusion, and maybe we can get her to talk about her trip a little bit to the Grand Canyon last October. So Katy, are you ready to go?
Thank you, Melissa, for the introductions, and welcome everyone to my webinar, Quality and Agile, the sprint is too short.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to do this. I'm really excited to go to the conference in October, and I hope I will be able to meet some of you guys in person. So today, we're going to talk about a very typical problem that a lot of QA engineers are exposed to when they start transitioning to Agile. And that's the question of how can we fit all of our quality activities into one short sprint. So I'll talk about that, and I'll suggest some ways to solve the problem, and I'll also tell you about my own experience and our own experience as we transition to Agile and all of the challenges that we have met. So as Melissa said, about 19 years out of my overall 20 years in technology, I spent in the depth of development silo. And then last year, a year and a half ago, actually, I got this new job, a director of software engineering with Premier, and I was thrilled. I was mostly excited about being in charge of an engineering organization which was cross-functional. We had developers and testers working together towards a common goal, reporting up the same organizational structure. And so when I came to Premier, my first and foremost goal was to transition the engineering processes, the engineering organization to Agile and basically achieve agility. And that wasn't my first attempt. I had years of experience working for other companies that implemented different flavors and different aspects of Agile, from really successful implementations to this one example of where I worked when I worked for a very waterfall focused company, and I tried to do my best of introducing some aspects of Agile and I tried to build one team and transition one product to Agile, make it an Agile environment, and it was very challenging, a lot of struggle. But when I came to Premier, I felt like, okay, I was armed with all of the knowledge of good and bad successes and failures, and I can make it work. And the transformation turned out to be really very successful. In a very short period of time, we were able to build the teams, transition to Scrum process. We started running sprints. We started going through the sizing and scoping with our product management. They were extremely supportive. And then any Agile transformation has two sides, right? It's the process, but also it has to be the technology. It has to be automation. And so we were really successful in doing that. We automated a lot of build and deployment processes. And as a result, we were able to ship frequent releases at the end of every 2-week sprint. We were able to deliver a small package with bug fixes and enhancements to production. And this way we were able to build a very flexible roadmap, which was awesome. And we were happy, proud of ourselves, could pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, great job. And yet, deep down, I knew, and we all knew, we still had a problem. And the problem was very subtle. It wasn't something that you can pinpoint by, putting your finger on a velocity chart or a burn down chart or something specific. And the problem was around quality. And first of all, the most noticeable thing was complaints and frustration and unhappiness that I could see and hear from my team members, and especially from QA engineers. They would come to me and say, and somehow all of those complaints were revolving around the timing, the length of the sprint, which was 2 weeks. And they seemed to feel like the 2 weeks were not enough to do everything they wanted to do in terms of quality. They felt like there was no time to test properly. They could only do some very basic functional testing of acceptance criteria, but nothing else. They couldn't work on performance testing. They couldn't work on security testing. They couldn't work on integration. They couldn't run proper regression. And they felt like they were stressed out, under constant pressure. Every 2 weeks, they were in a situation where they had a deadline. They were marching towards the deadline. And what was interesting about the situation is that I heard from developers too. Developers also had issues with a 2-week sprint. But on their side, they felt like they could do more. They felt like they were idle, especially at the end of the sprint. They would want to pull more items into the sprint. And so there was this disbalance kind of situation of developers and testers not being on the same page. And as a result, the quality suffered. We knew our quality wasn't where we wanted it to be. So we brainstormed, we talked, and we tried to find a solution. And the solutions were, again, they were somehow related to the timing, to the length of the sprint, or to the, so one suggestion was, let's have a 3-week sprint instead of a 2-week sprint. Somehow people thought they would have more time to do all of that work they couldn't do in a 2-week sprint. And that came primarily from QA. And then developers had a different idea. They said, how about we split our sprints into functional sprints and have a development sprint first and then QA sprint after that. And this way we will not depend on each other so much. And I hope you guys are looking at the screen right now, like shaking your heads and say, oh, I hope they didn't do this, so we didn't do it. Those ideas were maybe not horrible ideas, but they were trying to solve a problem of timing, and it felt like the timing was not even a real problem. There was a deeper problem, more important problem to solve. And so what I suggest we do right now is to take a step back, and instead of talking about sprint and 2 weeks or 1 week or 3 week, let's ask ourselves a much more philosophical question of quality and the definition of quality and what is quality. And it's an interesting, even if you do a search, you can find many different definitions for quality in workspace or specifically software or even in life that are very interesting, because it's hard to, quality is this one thing that's very hard to pinpoint, very hard to define, even though we have a very intuitive understanding of objects or events or things that have high quality and things that are lacking in quality. But to talk about specifically quality in software, let's go back in time. Let's remember how we worked and how we did the testing years ago, 5, 10, 15 years ago, in environments that were primarily, mostly waterfall driven, or even if it wasn't the complete entire waterfall, it was probably phased approach when things happened in a certain order, and development came always first, the coding came first, and then testing or quality control came second. And everything was driven by requirements, right? The same requirements were provided to the development team, they created the code, and then the same requirements were provided to the quality assurance or quality control team, and they created their test plans and test cases, and they also created traceability matrix, right, to make sure that every test has a corresponding requirement. And what were really tested in waterfall was conformance. The definition of quality in waterfall was conformance to requirements. And to be completely honest, waterfall is very much about deliverables, not so much about software. So what we tested back then was mostly requirements and not so much the software itself. But another interesting thing, which again, it's kind of subtle, but it's very noticeable when we look at this chart that we've seen millions of times, right, is how we didn't just work in silos. We worked in hierarchical silos. There was a hierarchy with development on top and with development trickling down, right, into testing. The testing was downstream. And that's not a coincidence that we're using that top-down orientation, because in that environment, development really had a lot of power. They worked on requirements first. They made a lot of decisions. They had much more knowledge about the product than QA. They also were considered to be smarter. They had more education. They were paid better. And so this hierarchy of testers being kind of not only in a separate silo and not only at the end of the process, but also in the bottom. And if we look at the definition of quality and how it evolved through the years, and these quotes are from standard documents from ISOs issued in different years. The first one is really probably the oldest one. It just simply says, quality is conformance to requirements. But when we think about requirements, we can be 100% conforming to a requirement that is wrong, in which case the quality of our product is probably not great. So the second definition is it's more recent. It's not really very recent, but it's more recent. And it says quality is ability to satisfy stated and implied need. And we don't have any problem with the stated need. That's a requirement. But wait a second, what is this implied need? Who implied it, and how are we supposed to know what is it? And now with this little word of 7 letters, implied need, we suddenly move into a completely different space. Our industry suddenly turns into something completely different, in which we're not talking about just conformance. We're talking about users, user satisfaction and user experience. We're talking about performance, right? And today we are surrounded by software everywhere on all of our devices, computers, all of our browsers. We expect it to work a certain way. We expect it to be fast. We expect it to be easy to use, easy to learn. We have applications that serve thousands and millions, and in certain cases, billions of users simultaneously. And every single user expects their phone or their computer, their browser to work immediately. And that's, I think, this implied need that cannot be stated in a document requirement. That's what changed our industry. That's what caused Agile to start such a trend, because we want to know what the users think. We want to know what they want, what their needs are, what those implied requirements are, and we can make a guess on our side, but we need to deliver to the user to know the final answer, to get the feedback. And the most important thing about in regards to quality is that conformance can be tested through quality control, but user experience and user satisfaction and performance, they cannot be tested at the end. They can be defined, created, and incorporated into each step throughout the development process. And that's how another idea came to life, and that's the shift left. And if you look up shift left, and you can do it right now if you have a browser that you can use, and you just type shift left, you'll see a lot of articles that say shift left is means that the testing starts early in the cycle. And I disagree with the definition. I don't think it's about testing anymore. It's about quality. Quality engineering that starts early in the cycle. It starts so early, it starts before the coding begins, because now the entire engineering team, the entire cycle becomes about quality. Quality of requirements, quality of stated and quality of implied requirements. And the conversation about those implied requirements and quality of coding and quality of source control and quality of DevOps and quality of deployment, all of that together create a software product that will have quality in all 3 aspects. And if you look at this, right, and you think about all different aspects of quality, suddenly this cycle becomes, instead of being a cycle in a time frame, release cycle or project cycle or sprint cycle, it becomes a cycle of an individual user story. And if you think about the cycle this way, then it doesn't matter how long your sprint is, because it only matters how long it takes for the team to address one issue one user story, and how many user stories you can fit into one sprint. And shift left, if you think about shift left, and if you think about what we had in the past, that hierarchy of silos where QA was in the bottom, shift left means that the tables have to be turned. QA now has to be in charge of the entire engineering process, because if you think about quality from the standpoint of all of those implied requirements, then really the heart of the quality is knowledge. Somehow we need to guess and we need to know how our product, how is our product supposed to be working, and how does it actually work? Two very simple questions, not so simple, too easy to answer, because our products are huge. Our products are used by, like I said, thousands of users who might have different needs and different expectations and different internet connections and different browsers and different computers and different devices. So we need to know, QA needs to know, or the team, the engineering team needs to know what to test, how to test, when to test, not only through the explicit requirements, but somehow by just using their knowledge. And so that's why I say quality is knowledge. And this new QA has to, first of all, start working in the beginning of the development cycle and be in charge and orchestrate the entire development process from quality perspective. And to do that, they have to have knowledge in 3 different domains. They have to be the business experts, understand the users, their perspective, different users with different permissions, users with different level of knowledge, and be able to evaluate the requirements and say, you know what, our user, this is not going to work for our users. With our software being these days mostly software as a service hosted in private or public cloud, we have to know how it's operated, how we can serve those billions of users, or even thousands, even hundreds of users simultaneously. What's the performance and what are the potential bottlenecks? And finally, QA has to become much more technical than before. They have to understand test automation, scripting, but also we said quality of every step along the way, including quality of source control, branching and merging, build and deploy, DevOps, risks and potential issues that can come up from every step along the road, and they have to make a judgment on quality. And when I say this, sometimes I hear, I don't know, I don't see any questions so far, but sometimes I hear a question. People say, if, you know, Katie, if we are such a, like, you know, cross-functional organization, why are you focused on QA versus developer? Why do you say, like, this is QA is in charge, or QA has to be, has to orchestrate this entire process? Some companies don't use QA services anymore. They have just development teams where developers are in charge of testing. And my answer to this is that I think in the future, 5 years from now, or maybe 10 years from now, we'll probably go away completely from functional areas, from developers and QA. We probably will not have separate titles. We'll probably have groups or teams of software engineers who can do everything, right? Who can write different types of code, who can do automation in different areas, from DevOps to test automation, who can have that deep product knowledge in business and operational domains. So we might completely merge those functions. But then on the other hand, I know that in my experience, engineers, awesome engineers I worked with, you can kind of roughly split them into 2 groups or categories of engineers who like building things and engineers who enjoy breaking things. So maybe that's the boundary. Maybe that's the where you might want to be a developer, or you want to focus on quality. And I think that's the way our universities and our colleges go right now, when the fresh college graduates can be both. They don't necessarily, some people look for works for jobs in quality assurance, and some people look for jobs in development, but they kind of come from the same background. And so I'm saying breaking silos, right? Breaking silos is the recipe. However, I want to warn you from my experience, and that's probably something that you experience as well. Breaking silos is extremely difficult. That's not an easy thing. It's very challenging. First of all, because silos exist in two different dimensions. One is organizational dimension. If your organization still have development structure, kind of command and control managers and directors and developers, and then QA, it's very hard to build a really cross-functional team in that kind of organization. But even like in our case at Premier, we don't have development and QA silos organizationally, but the truth is all of our problems, all of those challenges, all of those, the sprint is too short complaints, they came from the fact that people in our minds, we were still hostages of our functional silos. Developers still saw themselves as purely coders, developers, programmers, and QA still operated in that being kind of at the end and in the bottom type of mentality. And that mental silo is something that's very hard to break, because it requires really serious change management on individual level and on the team level. So some of the ideas I wanted to share with you, some of the ideas that we're using, and I think we are moving into the right direction. I can't say we're done and we're completely out of the woods. I think we're on the we're on the way, we're making progress. So what we're doing is to enable the shift left. We have a, we start, every user story starts with identifying the test strategy or quality approach document that created in collaboration of with developers and QA, but is driven by QA engineer. And that's a conversation where we touch on every single aspect of basically how we're going to test it, how we're going to really make sure that the quality of what we're building is high enough and it matches our standards. We talk about specifically what positive cases, what positive scenarios, and what negative scenarios we will be testing. And that creates an input for the developer to think about different use cases in their code and create better code. They talk about performance, security, integration, any aspect that needs to be tested. They talk about data sets. And one huge side effect of having test automation is that it can be used, and it should be used, to create prerequisites for the testing, because sometimes you have to go through the same repeating process of setting up the scenario in order to test. You can do this through test automation. And then they talk about exploratory testing. They talk about dependencies, which is a huge issue for us because our product is a legacy product, and there are dependencies all over the place. And to talk about dependencies from the user perspective and from the business perspective and from the workflow perspective, but also collaborating with developers on what area in the code are you touching? How is it connected to other things and stuff, and what dependencies can you see there? That creates a huge, a lot of information for us to understand all of the quality implications, and then impact on test automation, impact on regression. But the idea is that this is the engineering, this is the quality engineering that starts in the beginning and goes until the story is closed.
Hey, Katie.
Yes.
We did have a question asking for some real-life examples of a software process that did not meet implied expectations due to the failure to bring QA in. Can you think of anything like that?
So you're asking about an example where we didn't think through the implied requirements.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I can tell you probably
If you're willing
unfortunately,
to share. Okay.
unfortunately, probably hundreds of stories. But one example just from, our recent experience, we had a new feature that was required by one of our most strategic customers. They wanted to tighten up the security, and so we work in financial area. We had some financial reports where they asked us to have security level associated with each user. So let's say if I create, and just to give you an example, if I create a financial report, let's say an income statement, and I am in charge, I work for a hospital, which is our client, and I'm in charge of my department, I only want to see the numbers, aggregated numbers for my department, right? And if I'm the CFO, I'll see the numbers that go across all my departments and all my hospitals or all of my organizations. So they wanted something similar. And we created this enhancement and we pushed it to production. It worked. Everybody were happy. And then it came back with complaints from the customer where they said, yeah, it works, but it's extremely slow. It's extremely slow because when you create that report, and I won't go into details, but it turned out that to create the report, we had to continuously communicate with the server on every cell or every number in that report, and that created a lot of performance issues. And that's an example of we did what was asked in the requirement. We had 100% conformance to the requirement, but there were some other implications of performance, of speed, of different users. If I'm a user on a small scale, that spreadsheet or that report probably worked well for me. But if I was a power user, like a CFO, who wanted to see all of the hospitals and organizations that he or she was in charge of, that created a lot of problems. And we can say that was something that was missed in the requirements, and our business analysts should have thought about that. But I say, you know what? We should be the experts. We should have been in a position to say, this requirement is good, but it will create performance issues. I hope that provides a good example for the person who asked the question. This is a great question. So some of the other ideas to enable shift left is using the same tools across development and QA. And I would add also enable access, same level of access for dev and QA, because in the past, again, because we were in silos, traditionally the access was different. We would restrict QA, we wouldn't let them access our source control, but those days are gone. We should be working as one team. And so it's always a good idea to use the same tools across dev and QA. In our case, we're using the same source control for our source code, and for our test automation, we're using the same tool, which is Jira. We use Jira for tracking the our sprints and user stories, but also documenting all of our tests. Automation, I mean, I can't even say enough about automation. That's always a great recipe to improve automating the routine. Everything that's done manually, repeated manual processes have to be automated, including test and including build and deploy. As you know, all manual processes are not only tedious and time consuming, they also create a lot of risks. and so the automation is always way to go. Using BDD and TDD is a great way to educate developers and to build their objectives in terms of the testing. And on the other side, teach QA to code, maybe not necessarily writing code, but being able to do code reviews, learning how to use source control, how to see the history, how to see the changes, and understanding what was done. That's a great way to merge those two functions and to empower QA to shift left. And so you see how we started talking about the timing, the length of the sprint, and the number of weeks or the number of days. And now suddenly we're talking about something completely different. And I think in my mind, that's exactly the point. The timing doesn't matter. If we do this, if we really focus on quality, and the entire team owns quality and is engaged in quality engineering, then it doesn't matter how long our sprint is. It can be 3 weeks, it can be 2 weeks, it can be 1 week, it can be 2 days or 2 hours. And the takeaways that I hope you guys will, remember after this session are in regards to the timing versus quality and cross-functional work versus phases and versus silos. So if somebody comes to you, or you feel that the sprint is too short and you can't fit all of your quality activities into the sprint, then it's a symptom of the disease that's called silodosis. It means that people, regardless of whether they are in a cross-functional organization or not, mentally they're still in their silo, working in phases. And no matter what you do with your sprint, making it longer or splitting it, it wouldn't solve the problem. What you need to do is break the silos, organizational and mental. And then until we move to that wonderful, bright future of not having developers and testers or QA at all, of having software engineers, until then, in my opinion, QA has to orchestrate the quality and drive the quality process, whereas everybody on the team has to own quality as if it was their baby. And to do that, we need new quality engineering that will be strong, knowledgeable, and empowered. And if you guys have any more questions, we have about 10-15 minutes to talk more, to ask questions. You can also send them to me. I will give you my Twitter handle and my LinkedIn account. Please connect and send your questions. And also share your thoughts with me. Like I told you about my vision of the future, how our development and QA will come together, but you might have other ideas. So please share them with me. You can write me a note, or you can write a post. We want more people participating in the community and technological community. So share your posts, share your articles, share your thoughts, send them to me, and please feel free to ask questions.
Thank you so much, Katie. This was very, very cool. Did you have one more slide that had your Twitter handle on it, I think?
Yes, I have my final slide.
Okay.
Yeah, I have my final slide. So, okay, so let me get through this slide and then maybe we'll have questions. So I am extremely thrilled and excited about the upcoming conference in Portland. I will be giving a keynote on Tuesday, October the 10th, and it's called Who Owns Quality? And this webinar today is a teaser. It's a little, to give you a taste of what I will be speaking about in my keynote. It will be along the lines of how quality assurance and how quality engineering is changing, where we are going, and what problems we're encountering as an industry on our way. And so please, if you will be in participating in the conference in person, please come and say hello. I want to meet as many people as I can. And if you don't, or in parallel, just connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and I always like getting questions, answering questions, but also reading and learning what other people think.
And there are a few questions from the attendees, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I think we have a few more minutes. One is asking, what do you think about the QA engineer? QA engineer works on several projects at the same time.
This is a good question, and it doesn't matter if that engineer is a QA engineer or a developer, right? Switching from project to project or switching from one team to another team creates a lot of destruction and create a lot of disruption and create a lot of context switch, and it's not good. I mean, in a real Agile environment, if you ask me, our goal is always to build a team and keep that team in, focused on their backlog, working through their sprints. It's never a good idea to move people back and forth or move people across the teams. I mean, they're not married to those teams forever, but it's always good for them to spend some time on the team to really be able to bond and to connect and create that synergy, which is actually what makes the teams so strong and empowered and create a lot of great results. So I don't think moving people back and forth or moving people from project to project or moving people from product to product is a good idea, because like I said, in Agile, there's a lot of implied, there's a lot of implicit knowledge that we need to know about the product in order to deliver, in order to develop and deliver it with the best quality.
Okay. Someone who followed up from the question earlier during the talk was asking, there's a lot of talk about AI leading into the death of the human tester. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Awesome question. And AI is one of the topics that I think is changing the entire way of thinking about software, about development, and about testing. Because if you remember how I said, we QA engineers, we developers, we need to know what our product is supposed to be doing versus what it's really doing, which is kind of hard and very difficult even today. Because like in our case, we have a legacy product that's 16 years old. It has like a million, it's extremely flexible. It has like a million different features, a million different options and combinations and permutations of those options. So honestly, I don't think there's one person who knows how that software behaves under every single scenario. But now let's take a step forward and say, what about AI? What about machine learning? Will we even be able to predict how the software will behave? Maybe not. And so I think that's the answer. The human factor will continue to remain, in my opinion, and I believe that the human factor will continue to be the key factor in quality. Because even today, as we automate a lot of repeatable processes, a lot of tedious, data sets and regression, there is still a lot of things that can only be done manually. Everything in regards to user experience and user satisfaction and user, workflows, that can only be done by a human. Everything in regards to exploratory testing can be only done by a human. So I think that as we move forward toward those more complex systems, the human factor and the human aspect will only become stronger, even though a lot of things will be automated.
Okay. One more. How would you tell a college student today to choose testing as a career or being a QA professional?
This is another great question. Thank you for asking. So we Premier partners with a local university, North Carolina State, and so we sponsor some of their projects. And so every semester we participate in their projects. I work with the students every semester, and so I have a lot of opportunities to talk to the faculty members, and I had a number of conversations with professors at NC State asking, who are you training? Like, who are you thinking, like, what professionals are you training, developers or quality engineers? And and I also asked, looking at your graduates, like, what kind of jobs are they looking for, and what kind of jobs are they finding? Is it developer, mostly development jobs, or QA? And the answer was interesting. They said that when in their coursework, they cover both development, programming languages, but also some of the testing and quality aspects. And when the graduates are looking for jobs, they say it depends on the person's preferences. And some people, I think that goes along the lines of building versus breaking. And some people are looking for test automation or QA positions, and some people are looking for developers positions. So I think with this younger generation, the younger folks who just now joined the workforce, I think they don't have that preconceived notion of developers versus QA, or one area being better than the other, and hopefully that will I think that hopefully that trend will continue. And so at the end, we will have software engineers who can do both or have a preference, but they will be kind of, we'll have both, and both will be great engineers.
That's great. Okay, I think that is the last question, and that is a very good ending point. Thank you so much for your time, Katy, and please consider coming to PNSQC and seeing her keynote. It will be Tuesday, October 10th. And thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.